Well, let me begin by thanking you guys for having us out. Angel Mounds is really one of the attractions for the Evansville area that is known around the world, maybe even better outside of the area than it is inside of the area, because we continually get stories from people who have lived here their entire lives who say, you know, I went in 4th grade when we went on a field trip and I've never been back. And then we go in and walk through the interpretive center out there, and we find people who have come in from Europe specifically to see these kinds of sites and these kinds of displays. So, we always like to have an opportunity to come out and talk to people, to spread the word about what we've got out there. Now, I am, as I said, I am an archaeologist. I actually have conduct research on the history of Angel Mounds and the late period of prehistory, just prior to Europeans coming into this part of the country. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, very briefly, is the archaeology of the site. That is, why is it something that's interesting and important for us to go out and experience and to learn about? And then I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about the kinds of activities that we're doing out there, what we've got coming up in the next couple months, and hopefully get you maybe motivated to come out and see the site. So we'll begin. Oops, there we go. Angel Mounds is one of several state historic sites in the state of Indiana. It is owned by the state, and currently it's governed by or managed by the Indiana State Museum and Historic Sites Corporation. The site itself is located on the Vanderburgh-Warwick County line. Back in the 1800s, when people first came in and started drawing county lines, these gigantic, stupendous piles of dirt that did not move were good landmarks. So actually, the county line sort of runs right down through the middle of the town. Right. The park itself consists of 603 acres, which is a pretty large size. Now, there's only 100 in what we call the village area, and that's inside this palisade line that I'll talk about here in a second. But the land as a whole was purchased by the Indiana Historical Society in 1938. In 1947, the ownership was transferred to the state. And today there are 3 organizations that divide the management, the property, the activities that take place out there. One is the State Museum. The other is Indiana University of Bloomington, which has rights in perpetuity to all of the archaeological materials there. And that has to do with the history of research in the site that I'll show a slide or two in a moment. And then there's the Friends of Angel Mounds, the group that I work with. We are a nonprofit group. We primarily work to provide volunteers and monetary support to the state to perform their activities. But we do also put together various programs out there ourselves. The biggest of which is Native American Days, which happens every year in the last weekend of September. So that's coming up in a few weeks. I'll also say, if you've been out there recently, the museum or the interpretive center would be just up off the side of the map here. And that bridge that you walk across to get to the village would be right about here. This is the Ohio River, and then these are just sort of the scattering of mounds that run throughout the village site. The site was first excavated by Glenn A. Black in 1938. Glenn Black was the first professional archaeologist in the state of Indiana, the first person to ever make his living digging square holes and picking up things that have been in those holes for hundreds of years. He was not a professional. He was not trained. He had no degrees. He was an amateur who was basically lucky enough to be friends with Eli Lilly, who was lucky enough to have enough money lying around that he could buy the site for the Indiana Historical Society to preserve it. In 1938, he began excavating out there with the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, one of the Depression-era make-work social programs, and that is still the largest and most expensive excavation that has ever happened out there. It lasted for 3 years, from 1939 was the first real season, to 1942, and then everybody went off to fight the war. Glenn Black, around the same time, became one of the first anthropology professors at IU, and then he came back with IU students from then on. So that's why IU still maintains its presence on the site. The publication in 1967 of Glenn Black's work is still the definitive study of Angel Mounds. It is 2 volumes. It is much too large to be called a doorstop, but it is a definitive publication of work in archaeology that, at the time, in the mid part of the 20th century, a lot of research simply did not get published. So we're very lucky to have publications for this. And of course, continuing today, IU still comes back more or less every summer to conduct field schools. This is, again, primarily college students who are learning fieldwork techniques. But especially since about 2008, the most recent project that is picked up out there, we're learning, relearning, and discovering that we learned wrongly before quite a bit of information about the site. The Glenn Black Laboratory of Archaeology at IU is redefining what we know about Angel Mounds right now. And they're there in May, usually, pretty much every summer now. And while they're out there, you're absolutely encouraged, you're begged to go out and talk to the people as they're working, as they're excavating. They want to talk to the public, and they want to educate us about how they're learning what they know. And so, again, certainly next summer, I'm not sure actually that they'll be there next summer, but if you ever hear that the IU students are out there excavating, they really do want you to come out and talk to them so they can get the chance to talk about what they're learning. What we know about the site itself. About 1,000 years ago, this was the equivalent of Evansville today. It was the largest settlement within probably a couple hundred miles in any direction. It was the seat of local government for an area that begins maybe 30 miles upriver in the Ohio from Angel Mounds and runs all the way down to Point Township in Posey County, where the Wabash River flows into the Ohio. All of that would have been under the administrative control of the leadership at Angel Mounds. The town was occupied first around 1100 and was abandoned by about 1425 or so. The process of people moving away began around 1400. Where we think that they moved was down to Point Township at the mouth of the Wabash River, because right around the same time we see 5 large villages kind of just pop up in that part of the state. And they continue to be inhabited for another couple hundred years. The timing is very nice. The material culture, the way they live their lives is very similar. So we think that over time, for whatever reason, that site out on the Vanderburg-Ward County line became less attractive to people, and these smaller sites, these smaller villages in Point Township became more attractive. And over the course of maybe 25, 50 years or so, people just sort of naturally migrated to those places. There was no disaster that drove people away from Angel. There are 11 mounds at Angel Mounds. 5 of them are very large platform mounds. Platform mounds are exactly what they sound like, steep sides, and then there's a nice flat top. And on top of these platform mounds were constructed important community buildings. One of them was a temple, the religious center of the community. One of them was the home of the chief, the political and social center of the community. And then important figures, important people in the community, or councils or important divisions of the town, like a clan, they would each have a large structure on top of their own mound. So if we have 5 mounds, one of which is a temple, so there's probably maybe 4, maybe 5 major divisions within their community, different clans, different family lines, or maybe the nobles versus the commoners, some kind of divisions like that. They were also surrounded by a palisade wall, part of which is reconstructed in concrete at the site. It was about 12 foot tall. It was really over a mile long, constructed of upright wooden posts, which were then daubed with mud or clay, and enclosing roughly 100 acres. That's the size of the town. This wall is a bigger construction project than the mound, which is the largest mound is over 30 feet tall and I forget several acres at the base. And that was constructed by carrying in basket loads of dirt by hand, but the palisade is much bigger, much more sophisticated and important construction project. So it's not just that people are centering and building a town around an important chief or an important temple. There is a defensive purpose to this as well. There's somebody on the outside who wants to come in. And finally, everyone always wants to know how many people lived there. Around 1,000 people or so, late in the period that the site was occupied. And by that I mean, obviously every town sort of grows and then declines in population. Just before population started drifting away, there was probably about 1,000, maybe 1,200 people living there at any given time. Now, all of this tells us that these people were part of the Middle Mississippian society. There's a nice big map here. The Middle Mississippians live right here in the middle of the Mississippi River drainage. Right? This is the modern scientific name for these people. We don't know what they call themselves because obviously they had no written records that they left behind for us. But this lifestyle that we call Mississippian dates to roughly 1,000 to 1,500. It's butting up right at European explorers. The first European explorers to come through the region were actually met Mississippians. They didn't meet anyone at Angel because, of course, Angel had been abandoned by then. But there are three main things that all of these sites throughout the eastern half of the country share. One, agriculture. This is the first society in North American history that got most of their food from farming. And they farmed three major crops: corn, or maize, beans, several different varieties of beans, and squash, several different varieties of that. Those three crops together can provide complete nutrition. So you really can survive and thrive on only corn, beans, and squash. And this is the first time in North American history that any society had figured that out and adopted that way of life. They also built mounds, especially large platform mounds. Mound building had been a tradition in the eastern half of the United States for thousands of years. The earliest mounds go back to maybe 5,000 BC. But it wasn't until about 1000 AD that people began building mounds for the express purpose of putting something important on top. All the earlier mounds have been cemeteries, burial mounds. And Mississippian platform mounds have, for the most part, no burials in them. That's not why you build a platform mound. You build it to elevate the chief or elevate the temple to put your ancestors in the sky. And then finally, there are chiefs in Mississippian societies. These are the first North American, Native American societies that have an institutionalized government. Someone who is in charge, and his job is to make decisions for the whole community. This is the first non-egalitarian society. There are haves and have-nots in Mississippian towns. There are not haves and have-nots in earlier Native American societies. So around 1000 AD, we see all three of these practices sort of appearing in the eastern half of the United States, and also here at Angel Mounds, about 1100 at least. And that marks a major transition in the history of Native American cultures toward a much more complex, sophisticated society. And again, it lasted all the way up to the early phases of European exploration. This is not the only important Mississippian town. It is certainly the most important and the biggest and most spectacular Mississippian town in Indiana, but it is by far not the largest overall. Cahokia, outside of modern St. Louis, is the largest. It has over 100 platform mounds and probably had a population of up to 10,000 or so at any given time. This is a very famous painting of Cahokia at its height. Monk's Mound, the major feature there, is 100 feet tall, and at its base has a footprint larger than the Great Pyramid at Giza in Egypt. It has an 18-acre base, and the Great Pyramid only has 13 acres. Their pyramid is much, much taller, but this is larger. It was constructed around 1000 AD, and it is now a World Heritage Site designated by the UN. So in theory, any country, any war, or anything that ever happens in the future, no country will ever attack this site and destroy it because it's preserved for the good of humanity, in theory. Another site that's interesting is Etowah in northwest Georgia. And, this was one that was actually visited by the first round of Spanish explorers in 1540. They visited a site called Itaba, which, if you do some linguistic magic on that, is Etowah. And they said good things about it. They thought it was a nice, well-organized, well-run town, that it was well-supplied, it was in a good place in the landscape, had good leadership. During excavation, we also found these two large stone statues. And the photograph is maybe not the best one here. It is a man and a woman. Here's the man sitting cross-legged, right? And here's a woman with sitting sort of with her feet up under her. These are ancestral statues. These would have been the things in the temple in Etowah that were the object of worship. Probably the mother and father of the line of founding and ruling chiefs of the town. Very interesting because it very much recalls the kneeling man figurine that was excavated at Angel Mounds. This is, it's about this big. It is one solid block of fluorite, a semi-precious jewel. It was found buried in a funeral on the Temple Mound. That is, when people finally departed from Angel, when they left, they buried their grandfather. And the pattern of ceremony surrounding this, the setting of this into the ground was identical to a funeral ceremony. The interesting thing is we didn't find his wife. And this is sort of an enduring question in Angel archaeology, is what happened to the mother figure? Did they take it with them? And if so, where did it finally end up? We also have Kincaid, which is across the river from Paducah. This is called the sister city of Angel Mounds, in that it's roughly the same size, occupied roughly the same time. There's a lot of very similar things and comparisons between the two sites. It was the closest other large town. It was Owensboro to Angel's Evansville. Just going the other direction down the river, I guess. I'll give you just a few little ideas of the things that we're doing now, what kinds of activities are going on out there at Angel Mounds. This is our 75th anniversary, 2013. The land was first purchased in 1938, and then, of course, very soon thereafter, we had this very, very large WPA project excavation out there that brought in many, many archaeologists, many workmen from all over the country, from all over the region. And to commemorate that, we just recently dedicated a reconstruction of the original WPA lab building, constructed as closely as modern building codes will allow us to exactly what was there in 1939, was when it was constructed, that Glenn Black worked in. The interesting thing about this is Angel Mounds is now becoming not just an archaeological site for prehistoric Native American culture. We are also becoming known and focusing more on our recent history as a Depression-era WPA project. And again, more and more of the work on the site is focused on reconstructing, rediscovering where some of these projects were, what was going on at the time, and making our reputation as a site for learning about that period of U.S. history. The largest thing that we do every year is Native American Days. This year will be our 31st annual festival. The dates are September 27th through 29th. That's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The 27th is the field trip day, so there will be 3,000 fourth graders running around the site. I would probably suggest you come out on Saturday, unless you like that kind of thing. Every year we have Native American dance troupes come in. This is to a large extent, what Native American cultures would call a powwow. There's dancing, there's music, there's traditional Native American art. We have an educational component to it as well, with demonstrations of Native American technologies. Last year we constructed a dugout canoe in the course of one weekend. It usually takes several months. I'm not sure how they sped things along. So we have dancers, we have demonstrations, and this is a teepee, of course. No one in this part of the country lived in teepees. That was out west in the Great Plains. But we also have some educational demonstrations and displays for various Native American cultures. The dancers, of course, are always the biggest draw. They're great. They're fantastically skilled at levels that I could never aspire to. And then the next big thing that we have innovated for Native American Days is called the Gateway at the Mounds. This will be the second year for this. It will take place on that Saturday of Native American Days weekend. Basically, the modern sport of lacrosse is the descendant of a prehistoric Native American game which some tribes named the Gateway. Every tribe, of course, had a different language. They had a different name for it. But in order to emphasize that, to sort of tie in with what's going on in Evansville today, which is that lacrosse is one of the fastest growing sports in the country and in the region, we decided to bring out some Native players. We're going to have 2 full teams of Cherokee stickball players to come out and play their native game by their native rules this year. We also have lots of local middle and high school players from the Greater Evansville Youth Lacrosse Association who will come out, and that whole Saturday we will have off and on various different lacrosse matches. This is the first time in at least 600 years that this almost sacred game has been played at the site that it was probably originally played at. We don't have definitive evidence that the people at Angel played it, but it would be shocking to find out that they did not. And as far as we know, this is the only place in the country where the Gateway is now and will continue to be played on the ancient sacred sites. Finally, if you would like to have some more information about what we're doing and what's coming up, the State Museum and Historic Sites is indianamuseum.org. That's a pretty easy address to remember. That gives information on the state side of things. The Friends of Angel Mounds is just angelmounds.org. And then the IU archaeology side of things is at gbl.indiana.edu, and that will get you information on where and when they'll be back out to research some more. So, anybody have any questions? Yeah.
It's been quite a while back.